Hello, everyone. It is Wednesday. This is LinkedIn Live, like 8 or 9. Excuse me, 8 or 9. And I am super excited for this one because today we're talking with my longtime friend, Kristin Demel. Kristin and we've known each other for a really long time, went to school together, college. And uh, Chris and I have actually worked together in a professional capacity too. And so the reason I have Kristin on here is she has a ton of experience in this crazy world of retail, both on like the buying and product selection side, as well as like agency world and all, both sides of the equation on retail, getting products into store and getting them out in customers' hands. So Kristin, thanks for joining us. How about let's just start real quick with just like give everybody a little bit on your background and kind of some of your experience, and then we'll hop into some discussion points here.
Yeah, that sounds great. Happy to be here and connecting with you again, Zack, for sure.
Yes.
So, I got my start in retail on the retailer side. So, the majority of my career has been in roles like buying, financial planning, inventory allocation. And then I worked with you for a couple years on the agency side. And my role really with the agency was to help brands do more in retail. And so, spent my time consulting with brands and with retailers on really how to drive the business. And then now, like you mentioned, I'm on the other side. So I'm on the brand vendor side now. So it definitely is a 360 perspective on retail for sure.
Totally. And so I have always, anytime we talk about business, I always learn something. So I'm probably, just for everybody watching, going to learn just as much as everybody on this live event, or if you're watching the video afterwards. So I'm super excited for this. And the reason is the relationship between a brand and a retailer can be very stressful, especially for the brand, but also even for the retailer, right? Because it's this symbiotic relationship where, and I say this to people all the time, the retailer needs the brand as much as the brand needs the retailer, right? And yes, the retailer has a wide selection, and the brand, their selection isn't as wide depending on the category they're in, but it is very much a relationship where you both have to work hard to benefit each other. And there's a lot of little stress points in there. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And let's start with like, if you're a buyer at any substantial retailer, what is that buyer most concerned about? Like, what are their objectives? How are they making sure they're doing a good job? Like, just give me some background on that picture.
Yeah, I think in the most basic sense, the buyer has to hit their numbers, right? Like if they're going to keep their bosses and the CEO and everyone happy, they've got to deliver their sales plan and their margin plan. There's all sorts of nuances that kind of go into that, right? Like driving market share and hitting your profitability or growing profitability. But the basic fundamentals, they've got to hit their sales and their margin plan. That's what they owe to the company. That's what they have to work to deliver.
Yep. And they're typically responsible for a section of the store, right? So you'd probably be responsible for a product category. And there, of course, are varying levels of categories, right? If we think about Home Depot, there's like a tool category, there's hardware, there's stuff like that. So that buyer is incented for that category to perform as well as possible. And there's some aspects to having that happen, right? That a lot of it comes down to product selection, but it's also like making the right decision around how many SKUs for a given product are on the shelf. So can you talk about like what, when a buyer is trying to figure out that puzzle, what are they like, how are they figuring out what's driving margin? What's helping me hit my sales plan?
Yeah, you're right. Every buyer is assigned some sort of product grouping. To your point, could be category, could be a department, could be a subcategory, whatever their lingo is.
Mm-hmm.
They have some set of products that they're responsible for. And if you think about, so there's some set of products they're responsible for, but there's also some set of, I'm going to call it resources for lack of a better word, that they have to play within. So if you think about, let's just be a brick and mortar retailer.
Yep.
And if you're in not to get it too specific, if you're in a category management business, your shelf space is kind of that finite resource that you can use to present your product to the shopper. Now, if you're in a fashion business, or even if you think about like an e-commerce business, then you start to think about things like open to buy. So how much inventory can I buy? That, fits in with my open to buy plan, or fits in with my warehousing and inventory strategy, et cetera. So buyers only have a certain amount of physical type resources that they can use to present their business to the shopper. So if you think about, that's a constraint. I'm going to use shelf space as an example, right? That's a constraint. You have to do the most that you can with that resource. And so to your point, then there's lots of levers that they can deploy against that to ultimately move more units, drive a higher ticket retail, drive shopper frequency, et cetera. And all of that takes a lot of data. So I'll pause because that was a lot.
No, that was good. That was good. Yes. And of course, I love to talk about data. So they have a finite set of resources. You started to get into like other levers. So keep me honest, but another lever could be like merchandising, right? If you're responsible for a certain product, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir for most people on this video, but there are lots of interesting and unique ways that merchandising can be handled outside of just how the shelf is set up, right? End caps, signage, pricing, all kinds of stuff. So you'd agree that's one lever, right?
Yeah. I take a breath and pause there, because ultimately, I think you had mentioned the word incrementality, which is my favorite word. Ultimately, you're trying to drive incrementality within that space. Let's stay brick and mortar for a minute. And so there's only a few ways that you can do that. You either sell more units, you get the shopper to spend more on that trip, you get him to come back more frequently. And so then to your point, merchandising is a way, there's all those kind of physical retail things, merchandising, signage, off-shelf locations that you can use to help prompt some of that.
And I would probably, I'm kind of going back on some of our prior conversations, but on the incrementality piece, there's like those levers, right? There's those few levers around driving the incrementality that the buyer has some influence and control over with the other teams internally on the retailer, but the vendor, the brand, can help them down that path, right? And I think one thing that when I talk to people, again, I learned this from you, but when I talk to people is like, it's very important to understand where you fit in that equation, right? Mm-hmm. Are you a brand on the shelf that is driving the visit to the store? Are you someone who is helping fill the basket? Are you helping drive additional margin? Is the merchandising or marketing plan you're putting out there helping with one step in that equation? Because then you are helping your partner on the retail side, like figure out where you fit in their overall master plan. Because I mean, I don't know what the number is. You could be responsible for, could you be responsible for 100 SKUs?
You could be responsible for more than 100 SKUs.
Yeah, easy.
Store, right? There's so many. You could be responsible for 100 vendor partners.
Right.
And then take that, extrapolate it against the SKU base that they have. So,
right.
So, and then if you're brick and mortar, take that against all the stores, right? Mm-hmm. So there's no limit to, the points that you can, that you can look at to kind of move that needle for your buyer. Yeah. Or, if you think about it on the opposite side, as a vendor, what you can't do is set it and forget it, because there's no way that your buyer is going to be able to get to and look at all those different points of opportunity.
Right. So that gets to my next question. So what can a brand do to help the buyer? Like when it's line review season, quarterly business reviews, however the like review structure is set up on your meetings with your partner on the retailer side, like what does a buyer look for? What are they looking for in those meetings? What helps build the relationship? Is there anything you can think of that is like, I would stay away from stuff like this? What's that story?
I think the number one thing a vendor can do with their buyers is don't set it and forget it. You need to know your business inside and out. What's selling, what's not selling, where's it selling, why is it not selling? There's some of those basic business questions that you should be able to answer as a vendor.
Yeah.
to be able to provide the buyer with an opportunity, because it's, not imaginable that the buyer can get to that level of detail on every single item that they have in their set. And so it's your job, I think, to bring that perspective. It's also
Totally.
your job to know the shopper. So
Hmm.
that's another place where data, insights, whether it's qualitative, quantitative, or just simply understanding what's happening within your reviews online, just bring that shopper perspective back to your buyer as well.
Totally. And that, like, so the one thing you didn't mention, which is weaved in, is like all the benefits of your product, because that's a really easy trap to fall into, right? I've got a new product coming out, or we've made some formulation changes, or we've changed the build of our product, whatever it is, and we spend a ton of time talking about how great we are, and sometimes not enough time talking about the market, the category, the Mr. or Mrs. retailer. Here's why this product is going to be successful past the benefits of my product. I'm hitting my customer in this specific way. There's lots of ways that rolls up. And I'm very much biased on this, but a lot of that is informed by data, right? If you're not using the point of sale data from your retailer, as well as market level data that is out there and available to everyone, if you're not working with the right people, this stuff doesn't have to be crazy expensive. There are brands walking in there that are doing that, right? And so if you got to think about your position in that buyer's mindset or the category manager's mindset. You're always jockeying for position, right? Even like who's a giant company, well, I can't, like Bosch Tools, right? In Home Depot is a big company, but there are smaller companies who can elevate themselves in relation to that giant brand by doing some of this scrappy stuff with data and insight.
You're totally right. Even be the biggest brand in the set, right? A 5% hit to your market share is still a big hit.
Yeah.
It's easy to say, oh, I've got 95% covered until you miss that 5%. And then it hurts, right? And,
Mm-hmm.
and a small brand can come definitely take that 5% from you.
Yep.
Um, you said something interesting I thought we could talk about a little bit, because you're right. There's other brands in the set bringing the buyer information, but the buyer's also looking at their brands on a spectrum of relationships. So if you
Okay.
think about transactional relationships up to strategic partnerships. And I think, the buyers are definitely looking at their partners that way. Transactional, okay, can they supply the product at a regular time? And that's really all I can count on from them. It's a good product and it comes in on time. Up to strategic partner, that's really helping me as a buyer build my strategy and execute my strategy, et cetera. And I think,
Yes.
brands can also look at their buyers that way, and their
Mhm.
retail partners, right? And think about what spectrum do I want all those relationships to be on, and how do I want to play? How do I want to show up?
Yes, that is such good insight. Yes, you are on a spectrum of your relationship with your buyer, and you have some control over where you sit in that spectrum, right?
You do.
You could, and it's both sides, right? The can I supply my product on time isn't like as exciting, right? But if you
Mhm.
can't do that, that's kind of table stakes. And even there, again, I'm biased, but data is a big help on supplying your product on time in the right places and being ready 4 months ahead of time or whatever your lead time is. So, yeah, that makes total sense. How about like, uh, what kind of should a brand expect stuff from their retail partner? Because like it's a symbiotic relationship. Like I'm walking in there trying to justify why my product should be on shelf and why I'm getting these certain merchandising approaches or whatever. But should I be expecting things of my retailer as well? Because as a brand, I also have to decide, am I going to be national in every retailer? Do I take a regional approach? Is there reasoning for that? Like some of these smaller brands just cannot physically support from a capital perspective every retailer that wants to do business with them off the bat. So like, do you have any insight on that side of the equation?
Yeah, I would say the answer to that has changed over time. I
Okay.
think if we think about 2023, 2024, what the economy is looking like right now, the shift back and forth between e-commerce and brick and mortar.
Yep.
And I say back and forth because we had a big peak in 2020. So,
Right.
there's a little back and forth there. I think vendors should expect open communication. That would be
Okay.
what I would tell brands to think about, and even buyers to think about as they work with their vendor partners. Is let's just talk openly about what's working,
Yeah,
what's not working, right? Because then that creates this relationship where we're nimble together.
totally.
How can we read and react and do better? And it kind of goes back to the don't let the buyer set it and forget it either, right?
Right.
So let's make sure we're talking about it so we can both get better.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. It makes you both better. That makes total sense. How about we kind of touched on this a little bit, but I want to dig into a little further, especially today with like all the stuff going on in the economy. How much is localization a factor? Right. So I've read a lot of stuff and I've worked in situations like this where a retailer, there's a couple paths, right? Your new
Mhm.
product, you get 300 stores. We're doing a test to make sure this is going to turn inventory. There's that side. And then, like, how do we expand from there? But then there's also an approach of, hey, I'm a brand. I have a really strong regional presence. I'm really supporting a certain area of the country. Walmart, I want to be in this region. Like, how does a retailer think about that? And then, like, is that an approach where retailers are taking a regional approach with some products, right? Because like I can buy stuff in the South that I can't necessarily buy in Northern California, even though it's the same retailer.
Yeah. Localization, and I would even tack on personalization,
Yeah.
are growing trends, have been kind of growing trends within the retail space for a few years.
Hmm.
I think the thoughts on localization have kind of changed over time.
Okay.
Right. So I would say at first, when I was thinking about localization on the retailer side, it was a way for me to get more products on the shelf so that I could understand the type of response,
Okay.
and really understand performance. Then enter this era of COVID and
Hmm.
in stock, and finding the product that I want becomes so important. And
Hmm.
so you saw a trade off during that time between inventory breadth and inventory depth from retailers. And so they
Okay.
wanted to make sure that was the most important thing to the shopper at the time. If I want toilet paper, I want it on
Yep.
the shelf. I don't necessarily care about,
Forgot about that.
regional, right, regional differences. But I think now we're coming back to a more kind of middle ground of localization. I would say the biggest impact on the retailer side to localization is bandwidth.
Oh,
So,
okay. Yeah.
in a perfect world, right, I'd have a unique assortment for the shopper base in every store. And I
Right.
could unique referring to inventory depth, number of facings, or even product differences. So I would have
Hmm.
a unique presentation. However, that takes so much data and so
Yes.
many humans to manage that. One, from executing it correctly in store, but to planning for it, forecasting correctly, organizing all of the vendor base. So while there is this desire, there's this bandwidth that you hit up against on the retailer side.
Right. And it makes sense. I say this all the time. Like in a perfect world, every single Walmart would have its own unique product selection, right? Because it's structured perfectly for the trade area of that Walmart and the customers that shop there because they're all different and they all like different stuff.
Mhm.
That would take like Walmart actually has an army of people, but it would take like 5 armies of people to manage that. So
Mhm.
now, would it be safe to say that if a brand really believed that a regional approach was right for their brand, the way that they would get something like that done is by helping the the person, their partner on the retail side, figure out where they fit into that localization strategy, like bring them the plan and why it makes sense and how, because in your POS data, you can get the data aligned to
Mhm.
distribution center, right? So if you work with a retailer
Mhm.
that's highly reliant on their distribution centers and that's how they manage inventory, that should be a factor in your plan, right? If I really believe I'm going to do really well in this area of the country and I don't really want to expand yet to everywhere else, well, it's one thing to go in and say I want to be in these 250 stores. It's a different thing to go in and say I want to be in these 349 stores that are all aligned to this DC, and here's going to be our fulfillment plan for that
Yeah.
overall approach.
Yeah, so it's what puts the retailer in the best position to win with the shoppers? What puts your brand in the best position to win, right? Like it gets exciting to get that first purchase order with product in every store. The
Yep.
problem is if it sits there and it doesn't turn, then you're going to have these terrible conversations with your retail partner and it's just not going to be great. But then it's okay, well then what are the roadblocks? What are the challenges that I need to help you as a brand overcome, retailer, to make this happen?
Yep.
I did a project when I was consulting in fertilizer, and so much localization in that fertilizer business as you start to think about organic versus more
totally.
chemical, even thinking about citrus trees versus tomato plants. So that's there's ways that these big retailers are accomplishing this. And then even, not to totally get way too deep, but even in LA and California, there's specific brands that only make sense and only show up on the shelves there.
Right.
So there's ways for these retailers to accomplish this. Even some of the mom and pop lawn and garden businesses are doing it, right?
Yep.
But it's, okay, what's the right thing for the shopper? How does this become a win-win? And then how do I help you overcome what those barriers are?
Totally. And again, you as the brand have control over that story. You need to influence it. You cannot leave it up to the retailer. Maybe it'll work out great if you leave it up to the retailer, but why do that? Right.
Yeah.
Even, I mean, would it be safe to say even on inventory fulfillment, like inventory management plan, I personally have seen a lot of success with brands helping their retail partners on the inventory side with the data the retailer's giving to them, right?
Yeah.
Almost every large retailer gives you your sales and your inventory by store and by DC. That is extremely valuable information because your buyer, keep me honest, has a lot of products to manage. He or she is not digging into the inventory allocation plan of every single SKU in the set they're concerned about. And there may be problems from an inventory perspective that they don't even know about.
You're totally right. And so back in the day, you may cringe when I say this, but back in the day when I managed an inventory planning team and inventory allocation teams, I used to tell my, fresh analysts, et cetera, that your forecast is going to be wrong, period. Yeah. It's just a matter of how wrong it's going to be. So, as a vendor, why not also be forecasting, questioning, and bumping it up against what the retailer is doing? Because ultimately you're going to get a better result. Yep. More eyes on the business, looking at it at different levels with different tools, you're going to have a better end result.
Yep. Sharing information back and forth. The retailer doesn't know everything. That's probably like the core. That's probably the core insight for a lot of brands is your retailer probably knows less than you think they do. Yeah, the data is sitting there somewhere, but as far as the people who are making decisions and trying to get things done, they may not know as much as you think.
I would twist that a little bit. They may not know as much about your product and your specific business as you think, right?
Totally.
They're operating at a different level. They're worried about different metrics. They're worried about the total category. They're not necessarily worried about your one SKU sitting in that one store.
Yep, totally.
Yeah. So they know a lot, but they're not looking at the business the way that you're looking at the business.
Right. Makes sense. All right. What else? Is there anything else? Is there any, like, before we cut this off, is there anything that's like, throughout my experience, here's the one thing I would tell someone to think about when they're like trying to manage this brand buyer relationship?
Oh, that's a loaded question. I could give you a whole bunch of answers. I think the main thing I would encourage retailers and brands to think about is that relationship spectrum.
Okay.
Not every brand is going to fit with strategic partner, and not every retailer for you as a brand fits with strategic partner.
Totally.
And there might be some places where you also just have to start out transactional. If you're a new brand and you're launching, the best thing that you can do is service that retailer with consistent supply and quality product on a regular basis.
Yep.
So, and to your point, that requires a lot of data. So figure out what can I do and what can I do well, and where should I fit on that spectrum, and what should I be striving for? And that might change over time, but I think focus on that and figure out what you can do well.
Awesome. Makes sense. All right, Kristen, thank you. We're at 25 minutes. We could talk a lot longer. We'll do this again and maybe we'll dig into some specifics, like we'll break apart this incrementality piece, or localization is a big topic with me and I love talking about that. So maybe here in a couple months, let's do it again.
Sounds great.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.